This is the Money Seed Podcast, where we discuss all things investing, plain and simple, the way it should be. Please remember, this show is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be investment advice. Welcome back to the Money Seed Podcast. I'm very happy to have Tracy Coenen with us. Tracy is a forensic accountant, a fraud investigator, and a divorce expert. And Tracy will speak to us about how she works with her clients on finding the money in a divorce. Tracy, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Gabe.
So Tracy, divorce is something nobody wants to think about. Nobody believes they're going to get divorced when they tie the knot. You know, marriage is one of the happiest days of most people's lives. And yet in America, roughly half of all marriages end in divorce. And if someone feels that their marriage is a little bit going sideways and maybe it's not recoverable, it's not salvageable, what kind of steps should they start taking to protect their money and to secure their financial future?
I recommend that people start with securing their information, securing their money. So I'm talking about things like getting a brand new email address that your spouse doesn't have access to, couldn't possibly guess the password to. That email address is not signed in on an old computer or old phone that you forgot about that's in a closet somewhere. And so it's really an extra level of security for your communications that might go on with your divorce attorney, with your experts like a forensic accountant like me. That's step number one. Step number two is running a credit report on yourself to find out, are there debts out there that you don't know about? So in the Divorce Money Guide, the very first step is all about preparing for that divorce and doing things like this to protect yourself. I, of course, hope that someone who's contemplating divorce or in the early stages has some money set aside for themselves to help take them through this process and pay for the attorneys and potentially get a new place to live if that's something that they're going to need to do.
Yeah, Tracy, I have not yet gotten divorced, so this is all new to me. But
not
when
yet,
you say knock on wood. But when you say set some money aside, I have these kind of naive conceptions of divorce, but how can someone set money aside if all money is going to be split 50-50 anyway?
Well, the important thing is you're not going to hide the money, but you are going to hopefully have some money in an account that's in your name only, that is protected while you're going through that process of divorce. So ultimately, you are going to have to disclose that you have this money, how much was there, what you've spent it on, show those bank statements. But when people separate, if one party is in charge of the money and is controlling the money and maybe is the breadwinner of the household, there is a tendency for them to put the squeeze on the other person, to cut them off financially. So if you have an account in your name only with some money that's safe there, you can have access to that during the divorce process. So again, don't hide it. Don't try to be secret about the money you have, but have that set aside for this emergency purpose.
And Tracy, you are a fraud investigator and a forensic accountant. When you work on divorce cases, what value do you bring to the table?
That feels like such a self-promotional question that I get to answer. I work in these cases trying to find the money. So I get brought in when one spouse suspects that their husband or wife has been hiding money, siphoning it off the accounts, maybe putting it in a secret account, or maybe engaging in secret spending. Things like drugs, gambling, affairs, buying assets that the other spouse didn't know about to try to hide those assets. When I come in, I am going through a process of looking through bank statements, credit card statements, investment account statements, and I am literally tracing that money, looking at, it came into the account and then there was a cash withdrawal or there was a transfer, and I'm looking at exactly where did that money go and what was it being spent on, so that my client has a better chance of getting a fair settlement in this divorce. If they don't know what's been going on with the money, how can they ever get a fair settlement? How can they truly come to the table and negotiate when they're in a position that they don't know what's been going on.
And Tracy, you mentioned the phrase fair settlement. And I think the word fair is always subjective, right? When you say fair settlement, what kind of assets or what kind of money is sometimes not distributed 50-50 during a divorce?
Sometimes the retirement accounts can be split some way other than 50-50. What I see in some of the cases that I work on is if you have one spouse who hasn't worked for years, maybe because they have been staying home and raising children, they left a career, they now are behind on the skills in their industry. If you think about that person returning to the workforce, they may never earn up to what their spouse who has been continuously in the workforce is making. So it might make sense to divide that retirement account, giving that person who's behind in earnings, behind in the skills, trying to play catch up, give that person a larger share of that retirement account because they realistically won't be able to save for retirement the way their spouse will. So that's one of those times when it may be split unequally. Another scenario is if we are finding that one spouse did waste money, spend it on illegal activities or affairs, things like that. How do you recover that once that money is already spent? Well, one of the ways might be an unequal distribution of the equity in the house. So the spouse who didn't waste the money and has been harmed because of that might get a larger share of the equity in the house.
Interesting.
So those are just a couple examples. There's a lot of different ways and reasons that assets would be split, not 50-50, but those are a couple.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's quite fascinating. So hypothetically speaking, if one person in a relationship, let's say hypothetically, wastes a lot of money on gambling or drugs or something, the other partner may be able to recoup some of that money.
That is true. You know, it's going to be very circumstance dependent. Divorce judges have a lot of latitude in how they decide these things. You know, I worked on a case last year where my client, the wife, was well aware of the gambling and even participated in it sometimes. And it was really hard to go in front of the judge and say, well, gosh, he was doing this and it was harming their family financially, because the judge is looking at it and saying, but you were there for much of it. You knew it was going on. You know, when he was withdrawing money from the retirement account to go gamble it, you were well aware that that was happening. So it is very case specific, but certainly there is an opportunity to recoup some of that money.
And Tracy, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see people make, right? When you first meet with a client and you find out that they need your help, they're going through a divorce, what are some of the things where you kind of, slap your forehead and say, oh my goodness, I wish you would have done this a month ago, 6 months ago, a year ago?
Well, it's interesting when you talk about that timing. That is probably the biggest mistake I see in these divorce cases, is not getting their expert involved early enough. So if you need a complicated analysis done, we need to have enough time to do that. And sometimes in these cases, court dates get set and judges don't want to change them, don't want to push them back. They say this case has been going on for a long time. So not giving enough time to get the work done is one of the big mistakes. And the other one is not gathering information quickly enough. If we go back to what to do early on in this process, if you're contemplating divorce or getting into, getting ready to file divorce, one of the things that I always say is start gathering all the financial documents you have legal access to. So if there are tax returns in the home, paper copies, get copies of those. If you have legal access to online banking, to an account that has your name on it, log into that right away and start downloading those bank statements or those credit card statements and secure those, because you don't know when you might lose access to that account. I've been involved in cases where the spouse takes your name off that bank account without your knowledge, or changes the password on online banking and then will not let you in. So I always say, gather that information right now, secure it somewhere other than the home that, it can't disappear. That's probably one of the biggest mistakes that people make, is not gathering the information they have access to.
Good point. Yeah. And I think most people are probably not even thinking about that, right? There's probably so many other things going on between, whether it's financial difficulties or infidelity or whatever else is causing people distress. Making copies of financial statements is probably the last thing on their mind, but I mean, it's probably valuable advice. Absolutely.
Well, and I think the financial process in the divorce is very overwhelming to a lot of people. If you especially have not been the spouse who has been in control of the money and has not been paying the bills and handling the budget, to think about, now I need to understand the complete financial picture and I need to gather all these documents. It's very, very overwhelming, which is part of the reason why I wanted to create the Divorce Money Guide, give people a simple 10-step process, very methodical way about going about this, giving them checklists of things you should think about. Consider getting these documents, and they can just run down that checklist to hopefully make that less overwhelming for them.
And Tracy, tell us more about the Divorce Money Guide. What led you to create it, and what information can people find if they go through the guide?
My favorite question, what led me to create it? I have been working as a forensic accountant for over 25 years, and the services of a forensic accountant are very expensive. It's just the nature of the business. What we do is very labor intensive, very specialized. And I would get calls from people who were getting divorced, who had concerns about the money, who needed to understand where their money has been going. But the fact of the matter is that they couldn't afford my services. And I say probably 95% of people who are involved in divorce can't afford a forensic accountant, or it doesn't make sense for them to spend the kind of money it would take, $10,000 to $15,000 just to get started with a forensic accountant. I wanted there to be an option for those people. I wanted there to be something affordable that would help them uncover some of this information. Because guess what? In these average, ordinary cases, it's not that hard to uncover the secret spending or the hidden money. It's not that complicated. So, in steps, the Divorce Money Guide. I said, I can create a resource for people that is cost effective, that outlines it step by step for them, what they could do to uncover what's been going on with the money. And you don't even have to be good with numbers to be able to go through the process.
Excellent. And Tracy, where can people find more information on the guide?
DivorceMoneyGuide.com.
DivorceMoneyGuide.com. It couldn't be simpler. That's
it
perfect.
Could not be simpler. And if you're a fan of Instagram, you can follow me there. My handle is cleverly Divorce Money Guide.
Excellent. Tracy, I believe you're also working on 2 other similar products, correct?
I did release 2 other products recently, one being the Post-Divorce Money Guide. So it's a smaller money guide. It's not as in-depth as the Divorce Money Guide. It is to help people get a handle on all those things that they need to do after their divorce is final to protect themselves financially and legally, and make sure that their ex can't ever meddle in their financial lives again. So we talk about things like changing beneficiaries on insurance policies, having your will redone, making sure that your name is off all of the credit cards that you had jointly in the past, things like that. None of it is really rocket science, but there's probably 30 or 40 things that I walk you through that you need to think about just to make sure that all that financial stuff is buttoned up and you and your ex have a clean break financially and legally.
Amazing. Yeah, it seems like it's not a simple process. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot to think about.
There are a lot of individual things to think about. So again, I go back to, offering checklists and worksheets that help people kind of work through some of these things in a much more manageable way. I take again and do 10 steps in the Post-Divorce Money Guide. And if some of them don't apply to you, you just skip them, right? But we break it down into smaller chunks because that feels less overwhelming to people.
Tracy, steering the conversation in a slightly different direction. If you were speaking to somebody who is, say, mid to late 20s, and they're just starting out in their career and they're thinking about getting married, what advice would you give them?
Step number 1, get yourself the Marriage Money Guide. So that's my 3rd money guide. You just opened the door so nicely for that, Gabe. But so jokes aside, as I was doing the divorce money guide, I was thinking about, well, why don't we reverse engineer this? If we're getting divorced and thinking about all the ways that the money might have gone wrong in the marriage, why couldn't we back this up and be proactive with people who are getting married and help them understand what their options are for money management, whether they're going to combine their money or keep it separate or do something kind of in between. But then how do you keep an eye on your money? When do you need a prenup? Why would you think about doing that? And what would you want to make sure you put in it? And how do you have money conversations with your soon-to-be spouse? And so I talk through, tips and techniques for having these conversations and some of the really important things that you need to think about before you enter into marriage to protect yourself financially.
Interesting. You bring up prenups. Do you think too many people get prenups or not enough people get prenups?
Not enough people get prenups. Even if you don't think you have enough money to worry about, prenups are really important. And I like to explain it like this. When you get married, you are subject to the laws of the state you live in if you ever want to get divorced. And those laws say, here's how your divorce is going to go. Here's how we're going to split things up. And here's what's going to happen as far as spousal support and things like that after the marriage is over. A prenup is your opportunity to say, this is how we want things to be split up. This is what we want to have happen with spousal support. So you're not letting the state laws dictate it. You're not letting a judge dictate what happens. You are deciding ahead of time, this is how we want things to go. So it can be really important because it allows you the opportunity to say, you know what, one of us has a business and we're going to keep that separate from each other or something like that. You can make all those decisions on the front end.
Makes sense. Tracy, another hypothetical question for you. What I'm seeing is that there's a bit of a trend here among younger people that they don't want to get married, right? So you have a young couple, same thing, mid to late 20s, and they're living together and they have a child together, maybe 2 children, and they never end up getting married. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
I think it's a perfectly fine idea. Not everyone wants to fall under the state laws about, what happens if you ever split up. Again, going back to the divorce laws, someone else is deciding what's going to happen with your family. And so some people are saying, hey, I want to opt out of that and not get married. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I know lots of lawyers because lawyers are my clients. And my lawyer friends recommend having a contract, even if you're not getting married. So some people call it a cohabitation agreement. There are other names for it, but it's kind of like a prenup for when you're not getting married that says, if we ever split up, here's what's going to happen with our money. Here's what's going to happen with the house we live in and things like that. So that can be really helpful.
That makes sense. Actually, that's the first time I've ever heard of that. What did you refer to? Like cohabitation agreement?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, because I always thought about that. I always thought, what happens to individuals if they separate but they're not married and now they have children? They have, different incomes between the two partners. They might have some assets they bought together, and so it's probably, like you said, it's probably a good idea to have some kind of an agreement or some kind of an understanding as to what will happen in case things go sideways.
Well, because even if you don't get married, you could still end up in court when you do split someday. One person says, she promised to take care of me forever. And so now I would like to receive support payments from her, even though we weren't married. That happens. And a cohabitation agreement, again, there are a number of different names that they would fall under, but cohabitation agreement is what I use to refer to it. That can help, clarify all those issues again on the front end. I think it's much easier for us to all agree when we're in love versus when we're splitting up.
For sure. Absolutely. All right. Tracy, thank you very much for your time today. Again, Tracy, the Divorce Money Guide, and I believe the other book that you're working on now is called The Marriage Money Guide. And maybe tell us a little bit more again about where people can go to find more information on Divorce Money Guide and some of the other guides that you recently completed, and where can people reach you and find you?
If you go to divorcemoneyguide.com, it is going to take you to the website where all of the products are. My main website is fraudcoach.com because I am your fraud coach. So all the products are there, but you can find me on Instagram as well at Divorce Money Guide. If you get to Instagram and you want to contact me, send me a DM there. If you get to my website, there's an email address there. Feel free to reach out via email. Happy to answer questions for anyone.
Great. Tracy, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.